Cool. Yes, go on.
So my name is Kristen Bonds. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm excited to talk to y'all today about our proposal. I am fairly new to Web3 and Catalyst and Cardano. As Nin mentioned in the chat just now, he introduced me to all of this at Consensus this year. He graciously gave me free tickets to go to Consensus here in my town where I live, Austin, Texas, where my first event I went to was the Cardano party, where I met so many cool people, and it was very, very exciting. But the reason why that was interesting to me at all is because I've been working for tech companies my whole career as a recruiter and a people ops leader. And so I've worked with and spoken with the smartest engineers on the planet my entire career. I love being not the smartest person in the room. And when I started hearing like rumbles about NFTs and Web3, I wanted to pay attention because that's very exciting and cool. And also in the beginning of COVID in 2020, my career changed very drastically. So I was working at a very cool AI startup that I had kind of built from the ground up. I had hired all 150 people that worked at this cool startup. And then in COVID, because of hesitations and nervousness and all the things that were going on in the world at the time, I was laid off. And in that moment, I had the wonderful, amazing privilege of having a severance package. I had some extra money. No one knew what was going on in the world. And there certainly weren't very many like HR recruiting type jobs open. And so I decided to pitch an idea to a friend of mine who, I mean, actually, she wasn't really a friend. She was always sort of a vendor-client relationship that we had. She was a headhunter that was working with me at that startup. And I had spent over a year recruiting her away from her very well-paid agency to come work with me at this cool tech startup. And I was finally successful in March of 2020. And then in May, we both got laid off. And so I knew she was available. I knew she wasn't busy. And I came to her for the first time, not as her client, but as a potential like co-founder. And I asked her if she's willing to like maybe spin up our own sort of new age agency solution for people ops problems in tech. And she is one of the best recruiters I've ever met. I'm a pretty good recruiter myself. We were like, maybe we'll try like a new way of doing a recruiting agency. And then 2 weeks later, George Floyd was murdered. And in that moment, we all saw the backlash. We all saw the reaction to that around the world. And in particular, in the tech space, we saw like corporate entities stepping up to the plate for the first time in a really long time. And or ever, I should say. And having been a woman of color in tech, I'm Hispanic, even though I'm very white presenting. My co-founder, Mercedes, she's a Black woman. Having been in tech as women of color our entire careers, and having been told to be quiet about some of these things and like not bringing up these things that are a little uncomfortable for people, especially me, since I am an activist. So I've been a member of the Black Lives Matter movement. I say I was radicalized during Ferguson. We're talking about early, teens of the 2000s. And ever since then, I've been asked to kind of be quiet about my activism at work. And then all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it everywhere. And it was very inspiring for us. And since both of us are activists in our personal lives, we decided in that moment to kind of pivot our agency into equity and inclusion focus. Since all of a sudden we started seeing budget going towards these types of efforts in corporate spaces, we were like, let's step into that space, because our background in history and talent acquisition and people ops and HR gives us a lot of expertise to draw from. But on top of that, now people are talking about the thing that we really think is important to talk about. And so that's where we launched our business as consultants with our own little tiny agency in early 2020. And then the last 2 years happened. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary in July, and we have gotten so much good feedback. We've worked with incredible clients that have like shown us more and more about new strategies, novel mechanisms to both educate people on these topics, but also like fundamentally change the systems and processes inside of organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, that allow people to feel uplifted no matter what they look like, no matter what their gender is, or any other sort of way that people are different. And so that's been like the greatest learning experience possible these past 2 years of reading every report, every case study, every Harvard Business Review thing I can get my hands on and reading all of the metrics and data about how much the world of work is changing with the transition to a hybrid work environment, fully remote, people moving all over the world, all these things. So that's kind of my background leading up into, what was it, April of this year, when Nin, who funny enough, I've known Nin since 2014 when I was a recruiter at Twitter, because he and his co-founders started HireTool, which is now this huge, big platform. But back in the day, it was literally just a email scraping tool to get emails for software engineers you were trying to creep on. And that's what we do as recruiters. We creepily find software engineers on the internet and then ask them to come work at our companies. That was our whole job. Nin had a brilliant tool that did that. And I remember emailing him back in 2014 when we first, I first became one of the first users of that platform. Well, cut to 2021 is when we reconnected, and he's launched Snapbrilia. And he tells me that, HireTool is very successful. He's now started this new thing where he's trying to create these bounty programs to help underrepresented tech talent have blockchain verified credentials to help them get those good tech jobs that typically, you hear the rumors that like Google and Facebook, they really want to hire you only if you came from Stanford. Obviously, there's lots of exceptions to that, but it's an avenue, a really good one, I thought, to uplift underrepresented talent in tech, specifically in engineering. I was like totally bought in. There's a fantastic idea. How can I help? Was my question. And he's like, why don't you come to Consensus? And it was our chance to meet for the first time in person. And my co-founder flew down from Philadelphia to do it as well. And I remember so this was, if you remember, Consensus happened like 2 weeks after like a huge NFT crash kind of thing. Like I remember there's a lot of like drama going on in the space at the time, and like cryptocurrencies were like really going down and stuff like that. And so I remember going into Consensus with a little bit of hesitation and like, how is this is a question I've always asked. Like the first time someone told me about Bitcoin, the first time someone told me about Web3, my question is always, how is this not perpetuating the same inequities that exist in the world? How is this making things better for people and not just keeping the same old, same old? Because we all know that systems of bias exist because they are the status quo, and because if you're not doing anything to change them, they will remain. So how is this any different? And I look around like my first day at Consensus, and it's like nothing but white dudes, right? Everywhere I look, in every conference hall as I'm walking through, and I'm like, okay, there's got to be some women here somewhere. There's got to be some people of color here somewhere. And that's what I started looking for. And I was listening to a lot of the conference content on my laptop. I like watching the conferences being streamed. And then I would try to go out to events and see if I could find folks. And I was super, super lucky to find the We3 community, the Boys Club community, a couple of other like female focused DAOs. And I was like, oh, someone's doing this. This is great. Like, again, my first question, how can I help? Let me get involved. And what I found is that like most of the communities I found that are kind of women focused or like underrepresented, AKA not white and Asian focused, were mostly trying to educate people about Web3 technologies and how to get involved and all these things. They're purely like educational. It's not really a platform where you're like building things or experimenting. It's really just educational. And I was like, we can do better. Like there's more we can do. We don't have to just talk about the inequity all the time. We can create a space where that isn't even mentioned because it's just another space. So in all of these conversations I was having at Consensus, really good ones, that Nin is the best networker I've ever met in my life, by the way. If you ever have a chance to go in person to an event with him, he will personally invite you to every person in the room, which is really good if you're like trying to network and stuff like that. So he kept taking me to these like Cardano parties and Catalyst parties and stuff like that. And I was meeting just so many people who have brilliant social impact ideas. And of all the parties and all the things I went to that whole week, the Catalyst and the Cardano people were the most like genuine and authentic, like good-hearted people that are like trying to save the world. I think that's what we're all doing, is trying to save the world. So Consensus was great. Had a great time. All of a sudden, my co-founder and I decided to pivot slightly and see where we can actually start touching Web3 with our specialty. coming from our background in people ops, HR, like what I remember coming away from consensus with was, this is brand new technology. Imagine if we can shape it. Like, it's still so new that we can shape it the way we want it to be. It doesn't have to be exclusive. It doesn't have to be biased. What if we build it to be equitable from the start? And that's like super motivating to me to like be on the edge of a brand new thing. So we're spinning up ideas about that. We start deep diving into all the Web3, like understanding and learning we can. We go speak at an in-person event for Cabin DAO, because they had like a thing happening close to Austin, and we were like, cool, let's go learn. What better way to learn than to just go and dive in? And through all of that, Nin and us are constantly talking. We have like weekly calls. We're getting to know each other better and better. And Nin is like, hey, there's this like proposal thing coming up in Catalyst. Do you want to write a proposal? And we were like, no, that sounds hard, but tell me more. And then he shares that he has like a loose idea for like the equity piece around voting and representation and things like that inside of the Catalyst community. And to be totally honest, like even today, I still learn more and more details about how it works, and like how this whole system of voting and proposals and getting funded for all these cool ideas. I'm still learning even today more detail about how it works. But what I think is always true is there's always a way to be more equitable and fair with more knowledge about how these things work. So alongside Nin, my partner Mercedes and I wrote a proposal, like last minute submission, like the deadline the night before, to basically create a resource inside of the Catalyst platform to educate all of the members, but especially the dReps, on these topics that are really important to Mercedes and I, around equity and bias, and understanding like how those things influence you very subconsciously everywhere in your life. And the idea there is that if we can share this information, then hopefully we can influence voting to be less biased over time. So like the hardest part about fighting this, subconscious bias or unconscious bias, is that you have to think about it and name it in order to not do it. And a lot of times that includes asking yourself the question, like, who is not in the room that whose perspective I need to consider about the equity and fairness of whatever thing that's on the table. And I think the key takeaway from our proposal is we're trying to build a resource that will equip not just the dReps, but everyone on the platform with this knowledge, should they choose to pursue it. And then Nin shared with us, and we brainstormed some really cool ways to give it some interesting credentials and reward systems to motivate people to want to do this, right? Because it's a little bit of homework, right? To go read through all these very complicated things that challenge your own beliefs. How do we motivate people to do this? And one of the ideas that I think is really exciting is to basically create like badges completion that you can add to your profiles as voters, all of course verified on the blockchain. That's cool. But the idea there is that if this platform becomes a valuable resource, and then you can, I can add, she's got it, okay. If the platform becomes a valuable resource and people start respecting it as having good information, then a badge showing that you've completed all of the modules and you've gone through and like touched every part of how nuanced these topics can be, then it adds clout to your profile as a voter. And maybe you would choose dReps that have those badges in the long term, right? That's kind of like the 3 steps ahead version of this. So let me go ahead and just, if you don't mind, I'm going to share this super short deck that I have. Hold on, I have to figure out how to do this in Canva really quickly. Presenter view. There we go. I'm going to just show a couple of quick things about how it works. Is that working okay? Can you see that? Okay, sweet. So we are we decided to, like, of all of the fun campaigns that are Fund 9 campaigns that are available, none of them like exactly fit this idea, but we thought that the dRep improvement and onboarding was like the closest fit to where we could put a proposal like this that provides like a resource hub for everyone on the platform, but especially can equip the dReps with more information. And what we want to do is very specifically provide knowledge and resource and self-paced learning opportunities, activities, tools, all the different like nuanced novel mechanisms for really ingraining this learning available on a platform for Cardano and Catalyst members. This is essentially like a very well-developed learning and development tool that we hope will give the opportunity everyone wants to like voluntarily at their own pace step into this knowledge. We think that the impact we can see here is that we're going to improve the participation of folks who can see themselves represented better with more information and more knowledge about how to reach everyone in the room, not just the majority. And as with anything that we've ever built for our clients as a consulting agency, kind of specifically working on equity and inclusion work, everything about this topic has to be intentional. And so I kind of tell the story of like the magic of Disney World. If anybody of you have ever been to Disney World, I hear the ones in Asia are extra cool, but you go to Disneyland or Disney World and you look around and you're like, oh, it's magical. The thing is though, everything there is intentionally built to feel magical. And that's how like systems and processes underneath the organization of humans typically have to be. So if you want to see change in like pay equity, or you want to see the culture of an organization change to be a more inclusive one, it's not going to just magically happen. There does need to be some influence and intentionality behind rewarding the behaviors you want to see and trying to coach improvements on things that you don't want to see. And that's sort of the HR, like big brother behind you kind of thing. But there's a way to do it very organically inside of a space like this. Interestingly enough, I think what makes this even more applicable is we've done a lot of work with nonprofits. Nonprofits typically have volunteer models. And so most of our experience as a consulting agency has had us building systems and rewards and workflows for groups of people that are not paid to be there. And it's very different than like, you're an employee of this company and you're supposed to do this thing. And so here's this mandatory training, you should do it, as opposed to volunteers who we are just encouraging you to do this. And here's why. Juliana asked me a really good question last week when we first were talking about this. She was like, how are you going to like motivate people to do this? And I think the answer is always like, it's very big, but it's very simple. And like, you have to show the value of what comes from this. And since I've been a part of these like weekly town halls, and I'm seeing just like the myriad of faces and accents and things like that from all over the world, this community is incredibly diverse and interesting and cool. And I think we're starting off at a great place to recognize all of that. What I want to do is help build resources for education for people to acknowledge anything that's subconscious about the way we interact with each other to uplift everyone. That's the very long version of what we're doing. Here's a little bit of scope of the project. These topics are really sensitive. And so very often I expect to see pushback because not everyone is used to confronting their own biases. And sometimes these things can be really touchy. However, I think that with any sort of like culture shift kind of project, the most important thing you can do is listen. And so were we to get funded for this, you would be seeing a lot more of us. We'd be talking to people everywhere all the time. We would deeply ingrain ourselves in as many things as we can just to listen and see how people feel about these topics, to understand any pushback, any concerns, any ways we could be doing it in a more cool, novel Web3 way that's more inclusive, because we're a little bit new to the space. But thankfully, with regards to the costs associated with building this platform, Nin is basically volunteering staff really to help us build it from a tech standpoint. So I'm just going to loosely gather all of the engineering resources into like Nin's going to take care of it. And we are going to be kind of the driving leaders, thought leadership behind the content materials. It's going to be like as big or as small as we want it to be based on the feedback we receive. But the idea we think is around building a platform. Then Mercedes and I will need to then build the custom curated content that will live on the platform. And this includes everything from like workshops, trainings, activities, also like live like sessions with real people to like answer questions and talk through some of the more dicey things. All of this content needs to be built. These are like huge modules. Think about like digital school kind of modules. So it'll be lots of recording, lots of like content writing, copywriting, those types of things to make sure this is all perfect. We've written this material many, many times for specific clients. We're not going to write it specifically for this community to make sure it's relevant and inclusive to how diverse and large this group can be. We expect this to take like probably 4 to 6 months, maybe a little bit longer. We move pretty fast once we're doing something. And so like when Mercedes and I get really dived into something, like we can move very quickly on it. But the budget we set was about $25,000 to do this. That's kind of low for educational content like that. I don't know if anybody have ever like gone through like a mandatory training at work. These things are outrageously priced in the United States. Your like manager trainings would be like $60,000, $80,000, which is crazy. So we thought this was like a good place to start to build this like self-paced, like voluntary type of project. Now, with everything that we do at Heuristic, which is the name of our consultancy business, we try to be as data-driven as possible. When we're talking about bias and inclusion work, we have decades and decades of research about these topics. So there's lots of ways to be data-driven in your approach, even if it feels kind of like emotional and feelsy. There's a way to do it very intentionally with data. And one of the things we want to do is like really hammer out how we would track the metrics to measure our success in rolling out something like this to this group. So first and foremost, we want to keep track of like how many people are doing it, how many people are continuing to do it, or if they log in once and never want to look at it again. We want to keep track of the dReps who are actually doing it and like give stepped forward towards that goal of like credentialism and badges and things like that. We want to see, and we want to measure some of these pieces that are a little bit informal. So like, are people talking about these topics more? And we can hopefully like do some scanning, parsing things on the communication tools that we all use to see if these topics are coming up. Are people like in conversations that you have, are people mentioning these things and like catching themselves and stuff like that? And this is all very like hard to measure gently. But one of the things that we do, and I'm very glad to see just now in the town hall that this group is used to surveys, and more importantly, the survey data is then immediately sent back to the group to share. And that's one of the best ways that we would continue to measure success of this project is through user feedback right away. That's immediately actioned, because otherwise you'll have survey fatigue, which we've all seen many times in probably all of our organizations. You get asked a bunch of survey questions and nothing ever changes or happens. That's the number one way to demotivate someone from taking the next survey. We don't ever do that. So we're very, very intentional about every question we ask has a really specific purpose, and we'll share the results and what we're going to do and how we're going to action those results constantly. So I would imagine probably a quarterly survey for the user base to see how they're feeling about it, to see what improvements can be made, and really ask some of those hard feedback questions about how to make it better. So this is our group, me, my co-founder Mercedes, and Nin. I'm so glad to be partnered with Nin on this, because he is like a force of nature, as I'm sure you've all heard and seen his name everywhere. Just a wonderful, wonderful person to help guide us on the Web3 rolling out development piece of this, to make sure everything fits along inside of this platform in a way that makes sense for this very unique group. I think he will be sort of our Sherpa guiding us through all of this, and we will provide the absolute latest, cutting edge, most data-driven, phenomenal content on how to address bias and equity for the platform. That will be our role. So that's my very long, very detailed story of how we got here today. I would love to answer questions if anybody has any about what we're trying to do. Oh, and I see the chat's been blowing up and I haven't even seen it. I'm so sorry. Let me take a look here.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you. You said if we manage to find you, we will see and hear more of you. I would hope so. This was amazing.
Cool. Tommy, you asked the question, is it only for dReps? No. I think we wrote it, like we wrote the proposal to like target dReps to make it really fit inside of this campaign, inside of Fund 9, but it would be available to everyone. There's no reason, there's no way we would ever build it so that only one group of people could access the content. Yeah.
Nari, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks for the proposal. I think it's really amazing, and I agree. Nin is a really cool guy. So, you mentioned early on, sorry, putting certification for this kind of training on chain. I was wondering about more details from that, because I think one of the challenges of our decentralized autonomous kind of community is that there is no HR department, and things like this. I've been struggling to understand how we can like reimagine HR in the distributed world, because it's not like a department that has these special abilities to do something. People have to actually accept it and find the value in it and self-motivate to do certain things. But I could see it very useful for communities to say, if you have this credential and it's provably on chain tied to your wallet, then you're welcome to join as a member of our core team. And it could be like taking this kind of course or some other things that we select as a community, and provably being able to have people go through these trainings and things would be immensely useful, because then you don't have to have a gatekeeper to say yes or no. It's just automatic through the blockchain technologies we're building, and people can do it at their own pace in a decentralized manner. So I'd really love to understand more about the blockchain parts of this proposal and how that might work.
Yeah, well, I don't have all the answers to that right now, but I think the brainstorming that we've done mostly with Nin here is to provide like NFT badges of completion of various modules, and then everything that we have in terms of education. And so there'd be like, and like, I think the best case scenario, if like we're fully funded and then we build this whole thing and everything is like totally ingrained across the platform, then you're going to see this badge associated with dReps everywhere, and it'll be easy to find. And then that badge itself will be like verified on the blockchain via an NFT or something like that. Now, obviously, I don't know entirely what I'm talking about. Like, this is just like my best understanding of it. I can ask Nin to reach out to you specifically to follow up on that question, so he can give you more of it, because he and his team at Snap are going to be building it for us, whatever needs to be built. But that's my understanding of it. Best case scenario is that it becomes like a badge associated with your profile, that you'd either like mention like in your bios, you know, wherever you house yourself, wherever people find you. And it's also verifiable on the chain. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. And I can definitely follow up with Nin on the technical.
Yeah. Tommy, did you have another question?
Yeah, I'll just continue from there. I don't know enough about NFTs on Cardano to actually comment on that, but at least on Polkadot and Kusama, you have these like non-transferable NFTs that could be used for that purpose, but I don't know if we have those. But Allison has this project about providing certain DIDs, like for like fund-based DIDs for community advisors or whatever, proposal assessors, based on if they have taken a certain course provided by Catalyst School or not. So maybe that could work. So maybe
yeah,
Alison is a good person to also
What's
connect with.
what's their last name?
Alison from.
I will contact you, Kirsten.
Yeah, I'd love to chat. Like, certainly some of these pieces might already be built. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If we can add knowledge somewhere, we'd love to.
Yeah, and they're partnering with Proof Space, and maybe that could be like fast track. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be great. That's a great comment. Thank you. Let me ask the room, what criticisms do you have? What pushback? Do you think there's anything about this that won't work? And your experience almost certainly is longer than mine on the platform. Like, how do you feel like people will receive something like this?
Well, I think you're preaching for the converted. And
yep.
The challenge is to turn those heads that are just stubbornly against anything that says diversity.
Mm-hmm.
We've tried a lot, but we don't know how to do it. But this is 25,000. It's a very small ask for a very big impact. So I hope this goes through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of members of the community who are really going to be very excited about the potential for this information to be at hand. You know, it's I think a lot of people, like you say, you look in Catalyst and first all you see is loads of white guys, university education, you know, between 30 and 50, and it's kind of there's a block of people there, but there's a lot within those people. There's a lot of people who are sort of striving to make this space as good as possible, and this sort of content is going to really help, because it's very easy, you know, when you're looking at sort of equality, because of these biases that you don't think you've got them, you don't even see that they're there, but actually within this community people talk about it. You know, I've sort of experienced it myself, and I think it's really refreshing, and I think, you know, if this goes through, it's material that could really be used.
That's so good to hear. I'm glad to hear that people talk about it here. You know, it's really interesting. Are any of y'all familiar with the platform Lunch Club? It's like a networking platform. One of the very first people I met was this amazing like PhD in organizational science in the UK. And he was doing research and launching a startup to kind of do this really cool like data science approach to like networking and influential people inside of organizations. We thought it was fascinating. But he told us that the biggest issue was that all of the like venture capitalists and founders and like company leaders he was pitching this to in the UK absolutely shut down when he was talking about like inclusion and diversity. Like they don't talk about it at all. And this is like in 2020 when like I couldn't go anywhere without hearing about diversity and inclusion in my circle, like in the United States. And I was like shocked by that. I was like, what do you mean like they're not talking about it? And he said, all of my products, I had to like rewrite the pitches to talk about like the productivity output of humans instead of like how good it is for people to be uplifted, because they didn't want to talk about it specifically in the places he was pitching in the UK. And it was just like a cultural difference across those communities. And I think that's a really good like call out, is like, we have to figure out the right words to use. Like all of this work is persuasion. Like you're persuading people into the interest of knowledge that's for their own benefit. And I feel like that's the kind of the tradecraft that my partner and I bring to the table, is like, maybe it's because we're like Southern women. I'm from Texas. There's this phrase here that you get more flies with honey than vinegar, meaning if you talk sweetly to people, maybe they'll be rallied to your cause. So I think that there's a lot of, like, you bring a good point here to like meet people where they are in their journey so that they're not turned off by it and that they're encouraged to keep going, because it is for everyone's benefit. And hopefully we'll be able to communicate that value along the way to encourage it moving forward.
Yeah, just a quick comment. It sometimes takes time. Like I wrote my thesis on diversity management in teamwork of nonprofit organizations in 2006. I'm from Finland. So now, like 15 years later, they're finally starting to take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to read it. Can you send me your PhD thesis?
Yeah, I'll dig it.
I love to read. Like I said, I want to read everything on this topic because it's fascinating. People have been working on it for a really long time.
Yeah, I actually can confirm that. I've read Tommy's PhD. It's fascinating. You have to share it more.
Hey, it's not a PhD, it's just master's thesis.
Oh, well, I'm still gonna call you Dr. Tommy. I'm reading Megan's comment here. People don't believe that this is real and like it, or that it matters. Yeah, it's all about people. Everything that we do, like I'm super extroverted. Like I was very lonely during COVID, and so that's why I got on networking platforms like Lunch Club. But like this is a relational human type of thing that we're doing. The only way to like convince someone of anything is to like build trust and rapport and a relationship with someone. And it's like that's what I think a big piece of our like idea to make it work is to do like listening tours and to be as active in this community as possible so people know us and can ask us questions and can like have enough trust with us to ask us the hard questions, the really uncomfortable things. And we are like a safe enough space that they'll come to us with things like that. Because that's where change happens, is when all of those pieces are moving together. There's that link. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Anybody have any other pushback, comments of any kind?
I think the other part is that the participation. So if there is no pool of diverse people, how like it's not other people's fault. So it's like both sides of the same coin. Like it's if you
my
don't
cat
have
is coming to
people,
say
yeah.
but yes, I think the diversity of this community is a huge advantage in this. Now I say that having not spent the majority of my career working in global teams, I think I'm taking that for granted, but at the same time, like just automatically we're going to have more diverse perspectives in the room. And so people who come and consume the content or join the live like Q&A will just have so much more value add there than we would in the rooms I find myself in the US, which are, you know, narrower scope in most cases. I think that there's probably some negative aspects of that too. Like some people from very different to like white American perspectives might disregard this work entirely because it doesn't apply to them. But we still want to find a way to reach and appeal to people to address their subconscious biases, to uplift everyone. And I think that's a really interesting challenge that I'm looking forward to figuring out, at least a start to an answer for by this work.
I think that's the key. Like when you are in majority, it's very hard to see that you are so privileged and you don't see the problem.
Yeah.
Like what James said, 30 to 50-year-old white guy who is highly educated. Yeah, I'm that. But yeah. I've acknowledged this issue since the 90s. So.
Yeah. That's where I feel like I can add a little bit of expertise because, you know, most of the rooms I find myself in where so we do a lot of mentorship for startup cohorts, and we try to plant the seeds of inclusion very, very early with like first-time founders. And those rooms are entirely like young white men, almost always. And I found ways to reach them and to find like to motivate them and encourage them to think about these things, because, you know, if you build it with intentionality, it being like your organization, your company, from the beginning, you'll benefit from the business case for diversity, which is quite strong and obvious. We don't even really need to talk about it anymore because it's so obvious. But I think that I can deploy some of those ways to reach this particular demographic. One of the things that here's just like a personal story. I like in my personal activism, protesting on the streets, yelling at cops, all the things I do in my free time, right? I started to see in myself that I was like extremely like hostile to this like white man perspective. And like I would just see it a lot. I live in Texas. It's a very like white place. But then I had a conversation with someone like a wonderful like colleague of mine who showed me or like made me realize that like even though like a white man's perspective on this would be like extremely privileged and they really don't understand the whole picture, they still can look back at things that have happened in their life and it'll be like the worst day of their life, this small inconvenience thing that happened to them. It's like the women and the people of color see that and we just like dismiss it, like that's not even a problem. But to that person, it may have been the worst thing that ever happened to them. And like that's the like really like illuminatory piece to me that started to influence how I speak to people about this thing, because that's about like giving people the space to process, and like only in that space will they be able to learn and then change a behavior, is if they feel safe enough to do it. And like we talk all day about building psychological safety for people of color in workspaces, for example. That same safety needs to be there for the white man so that they can be the ally we need them to be to undo these systems that are biased. And like all of that comes with grace. And like you have to, and it was a hard lesson for me to swallow, but I work on it every day. And I feel like there's a lot of that stuff I think I might be able to share here to meet people. Obviously, I'm not going to say all of that as when I talk to a white man about his thing, like it's not even a big deal. And I'm going to acknowledge that you're privileged. No, that's not the way to go about it. But I'm telling y'all here that I think I have some experience to draw from there, and particularly to meet this group that I'm excited about. So I hope it gets funded. I hope we get the chance to try.
So I become kind of curious. So you said that you support startups to plant the seed for being diverse and inclusion. So what is the reaction of these people when you start talking about these topics? Are they curious, or what is their reaction? Are they both?
Yeah. So more often than not, we're talking about topics like I give workshops and I do like Q&A sessions about how to find your co-founder, or how to write your first mission statement and decide on your core values as an organization. And it's there that I want people to like plant these seeds for inclusion. And so typically the way it'll work is like, I want to listen to them first. Like, tell me where you're at. Tell me what you're thinking about. What are your options? And then I ask them, okay, where are you hoping to be inclusive? Like, show me in what you have where you've thought about this. And sometimes that catches people off guard because they're like, oh, wait, it's not actually in my values at all, is it? And I'm like, well, why would we want it there? And you like hold someone's hand through their learning to help them understand the business case. Like, people's motivation for this is a lot of different things. Some people outright are only pretending to care about DEI work because they're being socially pressured to do so. I can still work with that. Like, it's still more than they used to do, right? But if you try to help people understand like the business case, and that you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't do this, and how, you know, founders in particular, they are hustling, they're grinding, they're usually very product focused. To like you not always do they have like the mindset to think about their culture of their company first. And like that's why we want to like gently say, here's some ways you can do it, and it doesn't really cost any money yet. You just need to think about it a little bit. But it also does touch your product in a really significant way. Because like if you have this perspective in your co-founder, in your technical leader, in, you know, some piece of your product design that adds a better perspective, more well-rounded perspective, it will make you better. And that's attractive to people. They just have to like get, you know, show how all the dots are connected so they can get there. Yeah. And yeah, Megan, you're right. Austin is this little like blue liberal city in the heart of deep red Texas. It's a lovely place. It is still extremely like demographically not that diverse, which is a problem we're working on, but it is getting better as it grows. Austin has had a huge growth spurt in the past like 10 years because all these tech companies are moving here, and our housing market is like skyrocketing. It's very expensive to live here now, which sucks. And there's a lot of gentrification that's happening. But at the same time, there's more diverse people moving here, and we're trying to get to be a more diverse city. I think the last metrics that I saw was Austin's like 73% white, which compared to other big tech hubs like Dallas or Houston, or like, you know, other places in the US like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, those numbers do not stack up well. So we're working on it. But Austin is a good place to live, and it's a safer place for hundreds of miles in any direction for folks who might feel persecuted otherwise.
Is there any practical exercises or something quick for practicing empathy that you use in your workshops?
Yeah, like what I mentioned earlier about like if you're a decision maker or if you're in the room, I don't know if you've heard the phrase like a seat at the table. Like when I think of that phrase, I'm thinking about like the table in the conference room where the big decisions are being made. That's the space that I like to challenge people to think like, what voice is not being heard in this decision-making room? Like, what are we not considering? And that's like a really hard exercise to look for something that's not there. But that's like, I think that's the most important part of it. However, like I'm very inspired by Black venture capitalists in the US who have like abandoned that because it doesn't work. And they were like, we are going to build our own table entirely. Like, we're not even going to try to get into your room anymore. Your gatekeeping, it's not possible. We build our own table and we'll build our own chairs. And so I think that's a cool like shift on that. There's this really powerful woman named Arlen Hamilton who has like one of the largest Black woman investor funds that exist. And she speaks on this topic a lot about how like they've done it themselves because the space is so restricted, especially in venture. You know, it's just like almost entirely white and wealthy. So yeah, like that's the exercise I think is most important, is like challenging yourself to think about what you're not hearing, given the knowledge that you have. But that's very hard to do if you don't have knowledge to even think about it, which is where I'm trying to help, is give people that. But I think, you know, every day walking around in the world is a challenge in like understanding empathy and like extending empathy, because like the phrase like you don't understand anyone until you've walked a mile in their shoes, that's everyday life. Like every time you meet someone, you need to like try to understand and empathize with their experience so that you can understand them better. I don't have any like very good advice right this second other than like try to do it. But I think that constant encouragement and reminder is a role that I can play. I've made that joke from the beginning of like my learning about Bitcoin and Web3. I was like, I think my space here is to be that annoying person that's like, how is this helping people? Like, tell me how this works for people who don't even have electricity. I'm that annoying person just constantly asking these questions so that someone's thinking about it. Someone smarter than me can like consider that perspective as they work towards a solution that includes everyone. One thing that happened, so I used to be a recruiter. My first job was at Google. I was back in 2012, 2013. The Android product was just being developed and they were building the first Android phone. And it was a team of like 10, 12 Google engineers. And the first prototype that they built, everyone in the room was right-handed. So they didn't include any sort of left-handed functionality. This is how simple and easy it is to be exclusive accidentally, right? And like, it's not hard to understand that there are left-handed people in the world. And like, hey, maybe we should take a second and think about who all our users are. Well, 10% of them are for sure going to be left-handed. Does this product work for them? it makes the product better if you take a second to think about it. So that's why I say, like, sometimes the answer is really just as simple as like making yourself think about it. And if you can't do it, then there needs to be someone in the room whose responsibility it is to remind people to consider other perspectives as a band-aid for the situation until you can get more educated everywhere.
Yeah, this reminds me for just reducing the blind spots, because everyone has blind spots. So how do we make sure that we reduce these things that is not possible to come to our minds, which is not possible if you're all from the same place and culture or whatever it is. But something that I think it's as a stopper is the trust. So for example, in order to have empathy and to put yourself in another place, you have to think so empathy is not easy, and everything else, it has the both sides. Like it could be good, could be bad. If you're too empathetic, it could go to the direction to being too naive, and then people will lie to you, especially in countries, let's say in Bulgaria. I'm coming from Bulgaria, where like if you trust people, you are most likely will be left with nothing, because the corruption there it's huge, and it's not a good idea to trust people. It's not the best idea to be empathetic, because it's just the way that country exists. And yeah, so maybe that is something of the blocker, the trust.
Yeah. Now that reminds me of like my particular like academic interest when I was in school was like, so I was in business school, and like my favorite class was business ethics, where they talk about all the cultural differences across the world and how like in this place bribery is expected, and how do like American companies who have laws against this, like how do their employees behave when they're in this place where this is expected. And it's in a cultural shift, and it's very dicey, and it's really interesting. I did a ton of research on it because it was fascinating to me. But like this is basically an extension of that, because like I very much see like the representation of this community as like we have voices from every piece of the world that can give us perspective on this. And it's honestly like a pleasure and a treat to be able to get this much feedback from this many different perspectives, to understand like the Bulgarian perspective, but like, no, you're being naive. People are going to steal from you. And me, I don't even lock my door in my house in Austin because it's so safe, right? So like that collision of dissonance is where we can learn. And like, there's not going to be one answer, and that's okay. But like the way you break stereotypes in your mind is by intentionally seeking out ways to break the stereotype. If you like, for example, a thing my dad has always said, women are bad drivers, right? How do you break that stereotype? Well, Danica Patrick is a great example. She was a NASCAR driver, right? You put yourself in situations to find dissonance to that stereotype. And what better place than this like awesome community full of diverse people? I think it's a huge opportunity. And I would like to look at it like that, because then you can take that like potential negative and spin it. And as long as you meet people with like kindness, like I think I'd like to trust in this community that we're going to uplift each other. So like I could say something completely naive and silly, and someone could be like, no, Kristen, here's where you're wrong. And I'm not going to receive it as like a harsh criticism to my person. It's just the pursuit of knowledge. And I would hope that's the kind of space we can continue to create with what we're trying to build with this proposal. I would absolutely ask for everyone's help along the way to do this, if you think it's worth it, you know.
Can you talk more about your company, Heuristic? What is the vision for that? And is it just like a transitory one stop on your way to greatness, or is this it?
No, I would like for this to be it. So like our journey at Heuristic has been like this magical thing. So my co-founder Mercedes and I, we're first-time founders. We've never done this before. We're longtime people ops and HR experts, but we had no idea how to do accounting for our business and stuff like that. But what we're hoping to do is turn Heuristic into a bridge between corporate interests that have money and resources and community organizations here and all over the world that are doing the real work. And what I found right away is when we launched Heuristic, it took me about a month to realize, wait, this is my company. I can do whatever I want, including immediately spin up a philanthropy arm of my business. And so my co-founder and I, even though we were like scrappy and hustling and we don't have nearly as much money as we did when we had our full-time salary jobs, we still dedicate like a significant amount of time to doing pro bono work for community organizations. We do that for a couple of reasons. One is because we want to. It's like very important to us to like use our brain power for good in that way. The second reason is it gives us a full feedback loop that the work we're doing with like clients is actually touching the community that we're trying to uplift. We want a full cycle of feedback to make sure we're doing the right thing. But in that work, sitting like at the front row seat we have to all of that lets us find out that like there's so much opportunity for better connections to be made between all these groups. Like just in Austin alone, I can think of like 20 nonprofits that are trying to help with like digital equity and inclusion, making sure people have internet access and devices to be able to participate in the world of tech. And you have huge companies in Austin like Google and Facebook and Apple and Amazon that have all of this money they want to give to like, I don't know, growing their clone army of engineers that they need, right? But they're not talking to each other. And like, I want to be able to facilitate in the long term connecting resources to the communities that need them in the spirit of like uplifting everyone. So long term, I would like Heuristic to be heuristic.org one day. And I would like to continue to grow a team of consultants that all kind of have the same interest and like they're personally motivated the way my co-founder and I are to do this work. And we get to like rotate through as many organizations as possible to keep learning like the newest, best ways to build these systems to reinforce all the things we'd like to see, both for-profit organizations, nonprofit, and also just like anything else we touch. Like we're very involved with like the startup and entrepreneurial communities where we live. And like there's a lot of really smart people there. Like maybe we can channel those resources and just influence people in those spaces more. And so I would like to always be kind of solving problems with strategy in my head, but maybe I get a chance to like spend a bit more time with like young people and laying the groundwork one day. But in the meantime, like we are growing and we are like actively taking on new clients. We have spent the last year trying to take all of our offerings that are like very custom like solutions and productizing them into self-learning resources on our own platform. So we've already like done some of this work for Heuristic as a business, and now we're trying to replicate pieces of it for Cardano, and also not really pieces, like most of it will be new stuff for Catalyst, but at the same time we would expect to like some of those pieces can be translated over quite nicely. So we've built a lot of these things. We're very excited about deploying them and like seeing people use them and giving us feedback so we can get better and better. But as the world like changes to a hybrid kind of work environment, everything needs to be like the latest and greatest option of it. And so that's what we keep trying to like iterate on. And our mission is everything that we do is to like ensure that there's an existence that's better for everyone on this planet. And so I think that's going to require that we stay on the front edge of things, and like specifically in our like corporate space is like this future of work idea. Like we want this future work idea to be a place where we don't even have to talk about like bias and racism at work, because we've all moved past it. We all evolved past it. My super long-term plan is Heuristic is completely obsolete because we solve racism everywhere, right? But in the meantime, I want to be on the front edge of like novel approaches to the workspace and to motivating and rewarding behaviors of humans that are better for whatever aspect of people's like professional lives they choose to be.
Okay, so actually what you're offering is always custom made at the moment?
Heuristic?
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah, like just about everything we build is like is very like white glove for the organization that we're working with. So like we've worked with like growth stage companies where we build every internal operation system from scratch, and like it has to be custom and unique to their particular organization. And we work with nonprofits where they have some processes in place and we audit them first and see if there's any gaps, and then we'll like address those gaps like individually with solutions. Sometimes it's just education, you know, these are it all kind of depends on what the situation is, but since we're so data driven, we always try to start with an audit first of like, okay, what do you have, how do things work already, like how do your people feel about it? We might start with a survey to understand if anyone's got something they immediately want to complain about, and then we use that to inform everything that comes next. But I actually have to jump over to another meeting to chat with an old friend about a new recruiting thing that he's got a brand new idea for something cool. I would love to keep talking with all of you. This is like the most fun like Cardano space I've been in so far. I really like this room. I thank you for all of your questions. And please vote for us whenever that happens. I don't even have like a wallet or any of the stuff. I don't know how any of it works, but hopefully y'all do. So please, we'd love to
help with this. We'll teach you, no worries. No, share this video, definitely.
Awesome. It's very long. I'm so sorry, but thanks for listening to me talk for like a whole hour. Appreciate it.
It's really inspiring, actually. And if you could quickly, I know you got to go, but have you got some like basic level reading you could recommend on this subject?
Oh, I really like OC Tanner has some great reports about like human behaviors in the workplace. We really like OC Tanner. And read every Harvard Business Review case about the topic of bias and diversity inclusion, and read Tomi's thesis. That's what I encourage. Those are like my sources of knowledge. And also like every big like HR technology company has a like yearly report on like the trends. I always read all of those too. So like Lattice and Workday and you know all these big HR platforms, they have a lot of data. Culture Amp has really great reports. I read those to just keep a tab on like what people are saying, how things are changing about these topics there, and they all include equity and inclusion pieces now.
Great, thanks.
Of course. Awesome. Well, this is great. I guess I'll see y'all next week. The next one.
Thank you for being here.
This is so great. Take care, y'all. Of course. Bye.
Bye.